Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to take a look at food supplies and the distribution system and the threats that are facing those two systems. My guest today is an expert on this topic. Mr. Philip Lymbery is Chief Executive of a leading international farm animal welfare organization called Compassion in World Farming, as well as being a visiting professor at the University of Winchester. He was appointed an ambassadorial champion for the United Nations Food Systems Summit in 2021. His most recent book is 60 Harvests Left: How to Reach a Nature-Friendly Future. Mr. Philip Lymbery, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill. It's a real pleasure to be joining you.
I appreciate you being with me. Let's talk just for a moment or two about Compassion in World Farming. What exactly is that? What is its main mission?
So Compassion in World Farming is an international farm animal welfare environmental organization. Its mission is to reduce animal suffering and create a better food system by moving away from industrial animal agriculture, factory farming, which is not only the biggest cause of animal cruelty on the planet, but also is a major driver of declines in wildlife and nature, as well as integral to the climate emergency that we're now facing.
Mhm. And if our viewers would like more information on this very interesting organization, they can go to www.ciwf.org and learn much more about the topics we'll be discussing today. Now, in your book, 60 Harvests Left, you were talking about the food industry and some of the really major threats that it poses to the production, the distribution, consumption of food supplies around the world. What are some of these threats?
Well, a big part of the problem, Bill, is that in the last 60, 70 years, we moved away from a system where farmed animals were part of mixed rotational farms, where they were integral to soil health, where they were integral to looking after biodiversity and a natural thriving ecosystem. Those animals have been taken off of the land and they've been put inside into factory farms in cages and crates and confinement, where hens are kept in cages so small they can't stretch their wings, where mother pigs are kept in crates for weeks or months at a time, unable to turn around, and where cattle, instead of grazing grass, are kept in feedlots where they're fed grain. All of this pays a heavy toll, not just on animal welfare, creating immense suffering to those animals, but it also creates an unhealthy system which has to be propped up using antibiotics, and it undermines the soil that we all depend on.
Do you see that there's more of a concern for this today? I haven't done a scientific study on it or read that many about it, but it seems that there are so many groups that are more concerned about the humane treatment of animals, such as PETA or other groups like that, many of the United Nations agencies. But do you see that there's more concern and more legislation to try to rectify those problems?
Well, concern is definitely growing. Compassion in World Farming was founded way back in the 1960s. It was founded by a dairy farmer who became concerned at the rise in this industrial form of agriculture, this factory farming. He saw it happening in America. He saw it come to Britain and Europe, and he wanted to stop its proliferation. Now, there are many voices that are weighing in, and not before time, I have to say, because factory farming is one of the major problems at the center of the food system that needs to be addressed if we are to have a sustainable food system. And what I mean by that, frankly, Bill, is that we need reform if we're going to leave a livable future as a legacy for our children.
That is absolutely correct. We have to do this, and there are many ways to do it. What would you recommend to national leaders, to provincial, state leaders, the industry itself, as to help improve this situation? Do we
I
need
think
laws, regulations? What do we need?
We absolutely need lawmakers to pitch in and move away from industrial animal agriculture, move towards regenerative food systems where animals are returned to the land as part of mixed rotational systems. We also need legislation that rebalances diets, because globally we're eating too much meat and dairy for our own health and for the planetary health. So we do need to have more balanced diets. We need to reduce meat and dairy consumption globally by about 50%, in the US by 80%, if we're going to have a balanced, planet-friendly diet. But there are things that are at hand that lawmakers can get behind, such as new alternative technologies, protein technologies, such as the production not only of plant-based meats, but also cultivated meat that are produced from stem cells grown in a bioreactor. Meat without the slaughter, if you like, and without the downsides in greenhouse gases or the use of land. So I think governments need to pitch in. They need to set a course to a regenerative food future that will not only treat animals better, but also make sure that biodiversity is enhanced and that soil health is restored. And why is that important? Because if we carry on like we are at the moment, treating soils like dirt, then the UN has warned that we have just 60 harvests left, 60 years left before our soils are either useless or gone. At that point, it's game over. No soil, no food.
It certainly is. And we have a deadline on that, on the production of food. And also we're getting more and more updated information on the deadline on dealing with this climate crisis, with global warming. And the time is running out on both of these issues. You mentioned the topsoil depletion. And how does, well, you were talking about this a few moments ago, but how does toxic insecticides, how does this all play together to worsen the situation?
Soil it's not just dirt. It's a thriving ecosystem. Under each soccer pitch sized patch of healthy soil, what you'll find is 13,000 species of life. You'll find up to 4 million worms and all sorts of creatures that are absolutely vital for the proper functioning of soil. Now, what does soil do? Well, it does three things for humanity. The first thing is it's where 95% of our food grows. Everyone knows that. The second thing it does is it stores carbon from the atmosphere. Soil globally holds twice as much carbon as is currently in the atmosphere. And the third thing it does is it holds water against gravity. It's pretty much the only thing which stops most of the world's rainwater just simply running back into rivers and back out to sea. So soil is really important. But when we use artificial fertilizers and artificial and chemical pesticides, we disrupt and destroy that life that is vital to that proper functioning of the soil. And so what happens is the carbon in the soil gets released back into the atmosphere, and we don't want that. It means that the soil can no longer retain nearly so much water, and we don't want that because it becomes much more prone to drought and to flooding. And it also means that yields of food crops start to wither and go down. And we don't want that, particularly in a world with ever more mouths to feed. So governments and companies getting on board and setting new policy pathways to this regenerative way of producing food is the way to restoring soil health and a sustainable future.
And one way those governments have been brought together has been through the various United Nations environmental conferences. We saw just recently the COP27 that was held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. That was a very important conference as far as bringing together the key players, so to speak, in dealing with these issues. What were some of the recommendations that came out of the COP27 conference that dealt perhaps with the emissions of methane or perhaps soil depletion or flooding. You mentioned that a moment ago. The erratic weather patterns that have really become very prevalent. And a lot of that's traced right back to climate change. But what came out of COP27 that would be of assistance to us?
COP27, the top line was agreement on compensating developing countries, for example, for the harm that is caused to them through the impact of climate change, of dramatic weather events. But I think the disappointing thing, Bill, is that we went into COP27 with government agreements that added up to reducing greenhouse gas emissions to the point where we could expect to reach 2.5 degrees centigrade. Now, why is that significant? Because the safe level of temperature rise is 1.5. Catastrophic climate change gets triggered at 2. So going into COP27, they brought it down from more than 3 degrees the year before when meeting in Glasgow, and in Sharm el-Sheikh went in talking about 2.4. The expectation was that there would be new agreements to reduce that level still further, closer to the safe level of 1.5. That did not happen. That did not happen. One of the reasons why it did not happen was because the issue of food and farming was not central to the agenda. It's getting there. It's starting to be discussed in fringe meetings and in the sidelines, but it's not central, which is a huge mistake, given that more than a third of greenhouse gas emissions globally come from the food sector.
They certainly do, and they're making a remarkable negative impact on the world as a whole. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a podcast, or just a computer and you like our shows, please feel free to share them. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today, we're talking about the food distribution and really consumption that we all need to sustain ourselves on this planet, and some of the threats that are affecting this industry. My guest is an expert on this topic. Mr. Philip Lymbery is chief executive of a leading international farm animal welfare organization called Compassion in World Farming. His most recent book is titled 60 Harvests Left: How to Reach a Nature-Friendly Future. The topics that you brought up so far are so critical. They're just absolutely essential. The UN, we go back to this conference, it was just in Sharm el-Sheikh. The UN has provided a tremendous service on this issue, and in some ways has led the way. Now, there have been a lot of other groups that have been concerned about climate change, global warming. It's not just the UN, but these conferences have got to come out with stronger recommendations and more binding recommendations, do they not? Because they're hitting on all of the issues, they're saying the right things, but when it comes to the governments and the industries doing what they need to do, there's really a shortfall there. They're not coming through, and we're running out of time. As you mentioned, perhaps 60 harvests left, no more food, or our food supplies will be depleted. And the tipping point looks like it may be 2030 for climate change. So what can be done to tighten this up? Is there, the UN is not a one world government, but what can be done to make these recommendations more binding and really more salient?
I think the work of the UN is absolutely vital and something that I hugely admire. And I was privileged to be an ambassadorial champion for the UN Food Systems Summit last year in New York. What I do think is that the UN does need to continue its urgent mission to pull governments from around the world together to carve out agreements, global agreements amongst world leaders on what needs to be done on climate, on biodiversity, on food security. And amongst that, I think we should recognize that there is already a global framework on climate change, a global agreement on climate change, one on biodiversity, one on food security, one on desertification. All of those global agreements are set to fail unless they address the elephant in the room, food, and the way that we're producing it industrially. So that is why I believe strongly that the UN can play a huge leadership role, and should do, by carving out a global agreement on food to move away from damaging industrial practices.
I noticed on your website that you have listed several items that show how interrelated we are in this world today, how interlinked that the food chain is. Well, basically the whole world is interdependent in some way, shape, or form, without a doubt. But let's talk about a few of those items and talk about how they tie right in to what you're talking about today. How does this Ukrainian war, this war launched by Russia to invade Ukraine, show us how interdependent we are, especially when it comes to the food supply, distribution, and consumption of not only in foods in Ukraine, but also in many areas of Africa and worldwide?
The war in Ukraine, of course, is terrible, and we stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine and all people in areas of conflict. What that terrible war has shone a light on is that food security globally is a real and ever-present topic. And we're talking about a major grain exporting country, Ukraine, effectively having its grain exports shut down or hampered to a large degree. It's a big exporter of wheat to some of the world's countries that are most vulnerable if they don't get that wheat. But I think what it also shows us is that the real cause of food insecurity, of potential hunger in the world, is the fact that we are feeding so much grain to factory farmed animals. Forgive me, Bill, but just scrolling back just to explain that point. When
Sure.
animals are kept in the countryside, when cattle are out on grass or chickens in free range circumstances, they're essentially able to turn things that we can't eat, grass, into things we can, meat, milk, and eggs. As soon as we put them into factory farms, they're then reliant wholly on us growing their grain elsewhere, their feed grain elsewhere, on arable land that could be feeding people. And in that equation, we feed enough grain to factory farmed animals to feed half of humanity alive today. And most of the food value of that grain is wasted in conversion to meat, milk, and eggs, both in terms of calories and protein. But to put the war in Ukraine into perspective, the normal wheat exports that are being hampered because of the war from Ukraine, the EU and UK combined feed 3 times that amount of wheat to their factory farmed animals every year. 3 times the amount. So that is a big reason why food supplies are tightening, because we're feeding 4 billion people's worth of food globally to factory farmed animals. That's got to stop.
The United Nations reported recently that the world population has now tipped over 8 billion people. 8 billion people, which is a pretty large number of people. We've never been there before that we know of, I guess, on this planet, but we've never been there for sure. But anyway, how many people do you think this planet can sustain? Is there a cutoff? I know we have to change our farming practices. We have to change the way we raise cattle, pigs, whatever. But is there some number, some magic number, or do we need to think about reducing the population?
Well, the answer to the question, Bill, is it depends how you feed everyone. If you feed increasing numbers of people using factory farming, which is the course that we're on at the moment, and people eating more and more meat and dairy from factory farms, then by 2040, we will have a future where there is 1 billion more people, so 9 billion people, and a third less soil in which to grow that food. Now, that's not a very welcoming prospect, particularly when at the same time, by 2040, we will have triggered catastrophic climate change and nature, humanity's life support system, could be all but gone. So we've got 18 years to turn it around. And so it's not so much how many people in the world, but for how long are we going to let this destructive way of feeding people continue? And that is why I'm calling for a UN global agreement on food to move away from factory farming, to move to this regenerative way of producing food where farmed animals are restored to the land in ways which create a better environment and healthier food for everyone.
That is certainly the way we need to be moving. One very disjointing statistic, or it's not really a statistic, but a statement, was the World Bank recently said that if we stay on our current trajectory, that there will be a lack of grain and fertilizer that could cause mass hunger and famine. How does that play into all of this? What will cause that?
Well, by continuing to pour 4 billion people's worth of grain into factory farmed animals who then waste the majority of it, that means that there's much less available for people. If you add in food waste that we put into the bin, you add those two components together, the factory farmed animal feed and the waste that goes into our bins, more than half the world's food is wasted. Bill, at the moment, we produce enough food to feed 17 billion people, if you're looking for a statistic. Now, I'm not saying that 17 billion people is a good idea on the planet. That would be wholly unsustainable. But what it says to you is that the problem is the way that we're trying to feed people with factory farming and a wasteful food system. So that is the way that we need to move away from it. And what will make things even worse is using artificial fertilizers and pesticides on an ongoing basis will continue to kill the soil, will continue to mean that soil will become degraded and disappear, meaning that our prospects for producing food in the future, and I predict a cutoff point of by 2040. If we haven't changed by 2040, then the world looks a very unkind place for our children.
Mm-hmm. And if we look at that outer date of 2030 for climate change, 2040 for our food supply and consumption system, we have challenges in front of us and we need to move on them as quickly as possible. Well, in our last minute or so, let me ask you, what would you recommend that our viewers should think about as far as being involved in this particular issue, as far as mobilizing support, as far as informing the media, the politicians, educational institutions, whatever, to the severity of these problems and to get involved in dealing with them?
I would say get involved with the movement for a food revolution, a kind food revolution. Sign up to ciwf.org and we will send you ways to get involved, ways to bring these issues to the attention of national and global leaders, as well as corporations and the finance sector. What I would also say is that as individuals, we all have the power of choice on our plate. We can choose 3 times a day to eat more plants, less and better meat and dairy, making sure that any that we do have comes from non-factory farmed sources. So here we're talking about pasture-fed, free-range, organic, regenerative. That, in a nutshell, is my recipe for getting as many of us involved to save the planet, save the future for our children.
Well, Mr. Philip Lymbery, we all consume food everywhere from the production to the distribution to the consumption of food. Nobody can avoid it. We all have a stake in this particular issue and we need to be involved. But I want to thank you for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Bill. A real pleasure. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.